Hi, I'm Dr. Robin Goodman, and I'm a psychologist here in New York City. I'm also trained as an art therapist, and I really love working with kids and families and even adults that are grown-up kids. I have a background working with children and teenagers in all sorts of situations, as well as adults. I started working with really significantly and seriously emotionally disturbed kids and adolescents. And then I eventually found my way to working with kids who had medical illnesses and even cancer. And then moved on to working with children and families that were bereaved. It's great to work with kids and teenagers even, because they love life, and they really just are always growing and living beings. And so when you can help them early on with whatever their issues are and their problems, you realize you may have a lifelong impact on them. And I also like helping parents figure out what is the best way to interact with their children so that everybody feels successful in the family. And lots of times I work with adults who really have had problems and issues that have lingered since childhood, and it's only now that it's impacting them. And so I'd like to have this whole perspective on a person in terms of understanding what a child's life is like, and also then working with adults to figure out how they can then still have that opportunity to have the best possible life. I'm particularly passionate about helping families when there is some kind of anxiety or trauma. Did a lot of work after 9/11 and work with families who are bereaved, and run a program where we have families meet and kids meet with each other and find out that they're not alone and learn ways to cope. And then you give them skills that they can take with them wherever they go. And that's, when somebody is done seeing me or feels like they finished what they came for, then that's really the best feeling. Because sometimes I say I would like nothing better than to be out of a job, because no one really needed me anymore. And that's when I know I did something to help someone. I have private practice here in the city, as well as being the executive director for A Caring Hand, the Billy Esposito Foundation. And you can find me there by going to acaringhand.org. And that's where we focus on helping families when a child is grieving. And you can always, Google me and look for me at drrobingoodman.com. I'm going to talk about how domestic violence impacts children. Unfortunately, children are the unwilling victims sometimes of domestic violence, that although it's about the partners and the adults involved, it's the children that are around that are also very hurt by whatever is going on. There's a lot of things that influence how a child reacts to a domestic violence situation. Certainly there's the kind of violence and their proximity to it. So there's certainly a difference between a child who maybe was in their bedroom and had headphones on while parents were arguing, and that may be very different than a child who was right there when somebody violently murdered or abused a partner or a parent. So again, there's the situation itself and what the child witnessed that may be different. There's the severity of the kind of violence that will impact how a child is affected by what happened. Their age, certainly young children may not understand it, but they may be reacting much more to things that they hear or see because they don't have the language. Then you also want to think about the child's own temperament, their intelligence, their style. Some are more anxious, some have a harder time. They may have other emotional problems or learning problems that are going along with the situation. And then also it's their perception of how in danger they were at the time. So they may feel very scared for themselves, as well as protective or scared of the other people. And lastly, sometimes there's the after effects of the violence. Did children have to relocate? Did they change who they were living with? All those things may pile up and make it an even more overwhelming situation for the child. Now, in general, some children really, there's a range in terms of the reactions that children display afterwards. They may have a much more difficult time with their behaviors. They may regress, they may fight, they may show signs of withdrawal and depression. They may be acting out. They may be thinking things that you don't know in terms of being worried or afraid. And they may feel tense, anxious, upset, nervous, worried that something else will happen. So there's a lot of things that you have to pay attention to and understand might be going on for your child. And lastly, the thing we certainly worry about the most is some children that have been in a domestic violence situation will develop possibly a traumatic reaction. And that's where they may re-experience what happened in their mind and their thoughts and in their dreams and nightmares. Or they may feel on edge and aroused and always wondering and worrying that something bad will happen. And they're sometimes hyper alert and thinking about what's going to happen next. Or their body feels ready for something terrible to happen. And then they may avoid situations or people. So again, the relationship that they have with the people that are involved in the violence can have an impact on how they're functioning and how they go on. You know, domestic violence is about what happens that's domestic in terms of the family, and violence in terms of what the children are learning and watching and reacting to. They often need help with their reactions and how to manage their relationships with those people that were involved in the violence. I'm going to talk to you today about how to adjust to the return of a military spouse as a family. Now, I think we're all so used to seeing those wonderful reunion pictures and videos on TV and in papers, and we love them. They're just everything we want in terms of a family, to be together, to come home, and to embrace, that person that's been away serving our country. I think what we don't always see is that that can sometimes be the most difficult time for a family. There's all this joy and anticipation and thankfulness that that person is back, and relief. But then there's the day-to-day integration and reintegration of that person into the family. It sometimes has been called going from the foxhole to the front porch. And those are two very different environments for both the person who's returning and the family members. So the first thing to understand is that initial time may be a very mixed time in terms of there's a mixture of emotions. There's of course the elation and the gratitude. But what happens is that person is returning to a family that has been functioning maybe for many, many, many months without someone there. So there's a period of readjustment and reintegration. So roles may have changed. Children have gotten older. They've had all sorts of milestones that maybe somebody has missed. Maybe in a traditional family, maybe the dad is the one that's been deployed and now mom had to take over all sorts of new responsibilities. So when the dad comes back, those roles and responsibilities have to change again. Maybe grandparents were more involved to help out, and now where are they going to be in terms of that family system? So I think there's a lot to think about in terms of being patient and understanding some of the feelings that everyone is having. So children, although it may seem as if they're going to be so excited and happy, young ones may need time to get to know that parent again. There may be some anxiety or just unfamiliar feelings about that person. Other kids, older kids, at times may be scared that the person is going to go away again. And so they need to develop that sense of safety and security again and figure out who they go to for what now that everyone is back as a family. And then of course the last thing is, I think families always want to think about sometimes the difficult part of a return home, and that is how that person from the military is doing, and doing everything you can to help in their adjustment. They come back and they are often very happy and excited, but their role has changed and they may have to figure out how to fit in. And there's other times we know that they come home with emotional kind of difficulties, whether it's from things that have happened while they've been away and deployed, or things that are just difficult to get back into in terms of a family and a different kind of a life. So the more the family can communicate, with each other, can talk about how they're feeling, and of course always get help if things seem like they're not the way they should be or that they could be better, because there's tons of help out there for all family members in the military. I'm going to talk about how to deal with a depressed teen. I think it can be very confusing for parents to understand what's going on when they have a teenager, and especially what's going on in their head when they're not talking to you. So what you need to do is think about what their behavior might be communicating, and then trying to find out more. So a depressed teen doesn't necessarily come out and say that they're sad. They're showing you that they're having problems. Now that could be in terms of changes in their behavior, in terms of their eating or their sleeping. Maybe it's eating more or eating less. Maybe it's sleeping more or sleeping less. Are they not doing the things they used to do? Are they just not enjoying the things that they used to do? Also, are they being less involved with the family? Are they not involved with their friends or their activities like they used to? Of course, the other place you might notice a teen is depressed is by looking at their performance in school. And again, when it's a teenager, you may not have been so on top of that, but you want to pay attention to their grades, their activities, how much they're participating, and their entire academic behavior, as well as the behavior you see at home and with friends. Now, the thing that's also a little tricky for parents these days with teenagers is you don't always know what's going on, and you need to in terms of their social networks, and that means their social media networks. So kids can be bothered by things that are going on online. They can also be keeping some of those things underground and away from you because it's happening not in front of you, but in front of them. And we have, Facebook and emails and all sorts of text, and it's coming right into their own home, but you may not see it, but they're being very impacted by it. So changes in their behavior, being more angry, being more upset, being more sad, it's going on too long, and you don't really have an explanation for it. I think there's never any harm in trying to find out more. Sometimes you may need to sit down and talk to your teen and just ask them how they're feeling and if they're feeling sad, or labeling what you've noticed, and it seems like they're not so involved with their friends anymore. And the things you're particularly paying attention to is if they're feeling hopeless or helpless about their life or about some problem that they're having that they can't seem to solve. And certainly if a child ever talks about self-harm, then you want to be very careful and be proactive about getting some help for that. The sooner you intervene and help a teenager that's depressed, the much better the long-term outcome is for them to learn how to feel better and what to do to stay feeling better. I'm here to talk to you about how to help your child make friends. Now, friendship actually changes for children through the ages. When children are very young, we think of infants, toddlers, it's really about having fun. And helping them make friends is really about teaching them appropriate social skills for that age. And usually there's a lot of parent involvement in terms of the sharing and managing behaviors and, maybe the grabbing toys or the hitting that starts to happen. And it's really about getting them involved with peers on just a very simple kind of level. But as kids get a little bit older in terms of pre-K or kindergarten, friendships start to take on a little bit more meaning, and it's about having fun, but it's also about making those connections. And certainly as kids move through the elementary school years, there's really this sense of I like someone, those people don't like me, or she's really nice, or we have a lot in common. So by the time you get to those 6- and 7-year-olds and even 8-year-olds, you see a lot of already that peer group situation, and you may need to help your child with navigating and understanding how to figure out what's the best way to make a friend or even keep a friend. So when you're trying to help a child make friends, I think you want to teach them the basics, the please, the thank you, going up to somebody and maybe role playing. Hi, I'm Robin, and do you come to this playground, or, do you want to go and play soccer with me? Whatever it is, help them and watch them on the playground. Watch them when they're, at a party with their friends and a birthday party, and help them get more comfortable with kids. Now, if you have a shy child, you definitely want to make sure to put them in situations where they can practice maybe with a few people as opposed to a big group of people. You have to be careful with a shy child that you don't reinforce that shyness. You want to give them some maybe smaller experiences, one-on-one play dates, so they can get comfortable with one person. And then maybe when they go to a party or an event where that person is, they can become part of a group in a much easier kind of way. The other thing that's a little tricky with kids, even at those young school age, first, second, third grade, is teaching them about how to manage when people aren't so friendly, and making sure they have a lot of confidence about themselves, that they come and talk to you about their friends, that you know who their friends are, and you help them when there's a problem with their friends. When you get to the teenage years, those kids, it's not necessarily fitting in with those different groups as they are in middle school. But when the teenagers are trying to have friends, it's about what group fits for them in a very different kind of way in terms of their interests. They start to develop an identity. And again, you want to be as involved and aware of their friends as when they were little, because you still have much more influence than you think with a teenager. Talk about their friends, talk about their struggles, talk about maybe trying to be a friend with somebody who's trying to get them to do something that you don't approve of, and helping them with those situations. Because friendship skills are lifelong skills, and just because you have friends today doesn't mean you're going to want and need new ones tomorrow. And so figuring out how to do that will help you forever. I'm here to help you manage your child's stress. So although we think that childhood is a time of, carefree days and no stress, children actually can get stressed just as much as adults can, and sometimes for similar kinds of reasons. First thing is to recognize when your child is feeling stress, and they may show some signs of anxiety or stress by being maybe irritable or angry or short-tempered. They may actually just feel overwhelmed and stressed by what's going on in their life. Maybe they're procrastinating and you think they're just being lazy when actually they just don't know where to start. So one thing is to recognize that they might be stressed. Then the next thing is to think about the cause of that stress. Is it that there's too much going on in their life? Is it that there's some particular topic or issue that's problematic? Some test at school, some peer social situation at school? Is there some stress in the home that actually your children are picking up on, and it's making them stressed as well? The first thing to do is talk to your child to figure out where the stress is coming from. And one way to do that might be to just have a general conversation and talk about what you observe. Like, I see that maybe you haven't been so happy lately, or it seems like you have a lot on your mind. So label what you observe and have them start to tell you and have a conversation about it. Don't assume that you know what's going on for your child. Then what you can do is actually talk about the real feelings that are associated with that stress. Not to say I'm stressed, but really to pinpoint, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling worried about my test, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling left out by my friends at school, I'm feeling worried that we're not going to have enough money since Dad lost his job. Whatever it is, try to find out the source of that stress by going to the source, which is your child. Once you've listened to your child, you can then start to problem solve together. So what can we do depending on what the source of that stress is? Is it that they're so worried about their tests that they're going to need some kind of help with managing their schoolwork or managing their unrealistic expectations perhaps for grades? Is it there's a friendship situation that's causing them stress? Maybe it's time to talk about what's going on with their friends and maybe think about some other strategies depending on their age, whether you intervene or whether you help a teenager with some other kind of stress that's happening in their friendship world. But whatever it is, take it seriously, help solve those problems, and then see what you need to do to prevent that stress for your child so that then once you do solve it, it doesn't come back.